History often tells us when wars begin, but rarely why they become unavoidable. In 1783, the American Revolution officially ended. The guns fell silent. Treaties were signed. A new nation stepped onto the world stage. But peace, real peace, never truly followed. Behind polite diplomacy and fragile agreements, old resentments lingered. Borders were unclear. Trade was contested. Sovereignty was challenged. And trust between the former colony and the British Empire never took root. For nearly 30 years, tensions simmered beneath the surface until global war, naval power, and national pride pushed to reluctant rivals toward conflict once again. This is the story of how an unfinished peace, combined with empire, economics, and identity, led the United States and Great Britain into the War of 1812. When the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, the American Revolutionary War officially came to an end. On paper, the United States emerged as an independent nation. In reality, peace was fragile, incomplete, and deeply unstable. The treaty stopped the fighting, but it failed to settle the deeper political, economic, and strategic tensions between the former colonies and the British Empire. For nearly 3 decades after independence, the United States and Great Britain drifted toward another conflict. Old grievances remained unresolved, new disputes emerged, and neither side fully trusted the other. What finally pushed them into war was not a single event, but a slow buildup of pressure made worse by global conflict, economic warfare, and clashing ideas of sovereignty. This is the story of how that pressure built and why war became unavoidable. The Treaty of Paris left too many questions unanswered. Borders between the United States and British North America were poorly defined, especially around the Great Lakes and the western frontier. Trade rights were vague, leading to constant disputes over access to markets, ports, and rivers. Even the status of certain territories, such as West Florida, was unclear, creating confusion and friction between the United States, Britain, and Spain. More damaging than territorial disputes was the failure of both sides to honor the treaty's obligations. American citizens owed debts to British merchants from before the Revolution, while loyalists who had supported Britain expected their confiscated property to be returned or compensated. Neither side was eager to comply. American states continued seizing loyalists' property, while British creditors struggled to recover what they were owed. This mutual non-compliance poisoned relations from the very beginning. Tensions escalated further when Britain refused to evacuate several forts located on American soil along the Great Lakes. Officially, Britain argued that the United States had not fulfilled its treaty obligations. Unofficially, those forts served a strategic purpose. They allowed Britain to maintain influence in the region and support Native American tribes resisting American expansion. For Britain, indigenous nations were a buffer protecting Canada. For American settlers, they were an obstacle to westward growth. The United States, under the weak Articles of Confederation, lacked the military and political strength to respond decisively. When war broke out between American settlers and Native confederations in the Northwest Territory, British weapons, supplies, and encouragement flowed to Native forces. Though Britain avoided open war, its involvement was widely known. Only after the American victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794 did Britain begin to step back. The Jay Treaty followed, resolving some trade disputes and leading Britain to withdraw from the forts. But the damage had already been done. Trust was gone. The fragile calm did not last. When the Napoleonic Wars engulfed Europe, Britain faced an existential threat. Unable to defeat Napoleon on land, Britain turned to naval and economic warfare. The Royal Navy blockaded European ports and sought to choke off French trade. Neutral nations, especially the United States, were caught in the middle. American merchants had thrived by trading with all sides. Britain now viewed that trade as a threat to its survival. Through policies such as the Rule of 1756 and later the Orders in Council, Britain restricted neutral shipping and seized cargo bound for enemy ports. From Britain's perspective, this was necessary wartime policy. From America's perspective, it was economic coercion and a violation of neutral rights. Nothing enraged Americans more than impressment. The Royal Navy was desperately short of sailors. British law allowed the forced enlistment of British subjects, and Britain claimed that anyone born under its rule remained British for life. The United States rejected this idea, recognizing naturalization instead. As a result, British warships stopped American vessels and seized sailors they claimed were British deserters. Many of those men considered themselves American citizens. Some were native-born Americans, taken by mistake or force. Impressment became widespread. Crews fled at the sight of British warships. American sovereignty was openly violated on the high seas. To many Americans, this was not just harassment, it was kidnapping. In 1807, the situation turned violent when the British warship HMS Leper demanded to search the USS Chesapeake for deserters. The American commander refused. The British responded by opening fire. Several American sailors were killed or wounded, and British forces boarded the ship and dragged away for men in chains. The attack shocked the nation. This was no longer a distant economic dispute. It was bloodshed. Public anger exploded. Britain refused to issue a full apology and instead expanded its naval restrictions. The message was clear. Britain still treated the United States as a subordinate power. Unable to challenge Britain militarily, Presidents Jefferson and Madison turned to economic pressure. Embargoes and trade restrictions were meant to force Britain and France to respect American neutrality. They failed. European powers adapted. American merchants suffered. Ports collapsed. Smuggling exploded. The U.S. economy slid into depression, especially in New England, where trade with Britain had remained profitable despite the risks. Instead of uniting the country, these policies deepened regional and political divides. By 1810, a new generation of American politicians demanded action. Known as the War Hawks, figures like Henry Clay argued that national honor was at stake. A sovereign nation could not tolerate foreign troops, seized sailors, and armed enemies on its borders. Canada became central to their thinking. Invading British North America was the only practical way to fight Britain. Some saw conquests as leverage. Others believed removing British influence would end native resistance and secure the frontier. Whether annexation was the goal or a byproduct remains debated, but the idea of war gained momentum. At the same time, Tecumseh was forging a powerful native alliance to resist American expansion. With British encouragement, too many Americans, this confirmed their fears of British interference. In June 1812, President James Madison laid America's grievances before Congress. Impressment, trade restrictions, and British involvement with native forces had damaged the economy and insulted national honor. Congress declared war. Ironically, Britain had already begun backing down. The orders in council were suspended days before the declaration reached London. Compensation was offered for past incidents, but the Atlantic was wide and communication slow. By the time both governments realized compromise was possible, the machinery of war was already moving. The War of 1812 began not with a single cause, but with decades of unresolved tension, mutual suspicion, and global chaos. It was a war born from unfinished peace, worsened by empire, and ignited by pride. In the wilderness of North America, those tensions would soon turn into battles that shaped the future of two nations. By the summer of 1812, the road to war had already been paved, not by a single insult, not by one battle or decree, but by decades of unresolved disputes, clashing interests, and competing visions of power. The war that followed would be confused, costly, and often misunderstood. Neither side fully expected it, neither side fully prepared for it, yet the consequences would be lasting. For the United States, it was a test of sovereignty and survival. For British North America, it became a defining moment of identity and resistance. And for indigenous nations, it marked another tragic turning point in a long struggle for autonomy. The War of 1812 was not inevitable, but once it began, it reshaped North America forever. In the next chapter, we follow the conflict as it spills across borders, lakes, and frontiers, where ambition meets reality, and where a young republic learns the true cost of war.